Ever look at a character and thought to yourself, man, they could have done so much better with them? Well, that's what we're going to be talking about today. In any body of work with a huge cast of characters, there will always be several that'll be treated shoddily by the creators. This could be for a number of reasons, including developers not liking the character. Street Fighter has some truly iconic characters such as Ryu, Ken, Julie, and Chun Li, who have more or less carried the game through all its iterations. We also now have some characters who were added along the way who are now firm favorites like Juri from Street Fighter 4 or Nash from Street Fighter Alpha. However, in the game's history, there have been quite a few duds who did not work out for one reason or another. In this video, we're going to focus on characters that aren't very popular but could have been made more interesting with some better writing, or who have been treated poorly by the story and do not deserve the reputation they currently have. Let's get on with it! Nash. Charlie Nash is, in my opinion, Street Fighter's most tragic character. He's actually a pretty intriguing character, and his inclusion in this list is because I worry the story isn't done with him. Betrayed by the very people who were supposed to come to his aid, he was killed by Bison in Street Fighter Alpha 2. Now I would have thought that was already tragic enough, but then he's resurrected by Colin in Street Fighter 5, not out of benevolence but to be used as a pawn to defeat Shadaloo. So here he was, fighting against his will, against the guy who killed him initially. Driven by rage and revenge, Nash did his best to defeat Bison, and while he isn't successful in bringing down the Mad Tyrant, he was instrumental in his final downfall. But to do this, he dies again, and a pretty painful death at that. Being the character tasked with making the final sacrifice is always rough, but even after his apparent death, his status is currently listed as unknown, opening the door to yet another outing in the Street Fighter games. He deserves better and should be let go at this point. Any other outing, even if it has a happy ending, would just be downright mean. Hakan. Next up, let's talk about Hakan. Hakan was introduced in Street Fighter 4 and is a thriving businessman with a successful oil operation. He decides to enter the SIN tournament to showcase his fighting prowess while also looking for inspiration for new oil. Hakan was considered something of a joke character in the game with a weird fighting style that revolved around him having to oil himself up. Competitively, Hakan was basically useless except for the classic infiltration versus PR Balrog match. This, combined with his ridiculous design, is why he's on this list. Funnily enough though, Hakan has a decent story which could be expanded upon if necessary. He is a good character with an unlikely friendship with Honda, which I like, and a motivation that somewhat explains his weird fighting style, but come on, what's with the design and weird hair? His wife is a bombshell, but all his daughters have the crazy warp pipe hair. Unfortunately, this tends to ensure that Hakan isn't taken seriously, which is a shame as underneath all that craziness, he's a good character and a strong fighter. If he ever returns, a makeover could do him some good, and perhaps a few better options in battle wouldn't be remiss either.
Become DashFight supporter on Patreon. Get early access to DashFight guides. Click the link in the description.
Abigail. Next, we have to talk about Abigail. He was first introduced in Final Fight, where he was the lieutenant to Belger. When faced with Guy, he proved to be a formidable fighter, and canonically speaking, he's a very powerful character. But then, when he was introduced into Street Fighter 5, gone was the menacing lieutenant of a powerful gang boss, and instead, we have a man-child who goes around making weird truck noises? Like, I get it, maybe they were going for the stereotypical big guy with a handful of straw thing, but I think they missed a chance to give Abigail some real meaning. I mean, in Street Fighter 5 it is said that he has given up a life of crime and has decided to open an automobile shop, and that's good. But then in his story, all of his fights come due to people misinterpreting what he said. With Ibuki, she misinterpreted his sounds as farting noises, and that was it. That was the entire reason for their fight. And Juri? Abigail said he felt like a flat tire, and Juri took that as an insult on her chest size. Really? Really, Capcom? Abigail deserves better. There have been other characters who made the leap from Final Fight to Street Fighter like Poison, Guy, and Cody, and they all had very good stories. But then with Abigail, it doesn't feel like a story but a series of contrived excuses to get the big guy to fight. I hope that if Abigail returns, they at least give him something decent to do, and if they can't, then perhaps they should just notch his appearance up to a failed attempt at a joke character and not bring him back at all. F.A.N.G. Alright, so F.A.N.G is supposed to be the replacement for Sagat in the list of Shadaloo bosses, and as far as Street Fighter villains go, F.A.N.G is without a doubt one of the worst. Sagat was a complex character who was ruthless, but also had enough redeeming value to be considered a character capable of change. While both Vega and Balrog aren't as complex as Sagat, they are able villains with enough personality and style to make them stand out. But F.A.N.G? Oh my god, F.A.N.G is terrible. But what makes F.A.N.G so annoying, to me at least, is that he could have been so much better. He is a character who, as an assassin that works with poison, has a very cool set of moves, but making him the punching bag of the entire cast during the story mode made his backstory as a ruthless killer who was considered by Bison as a worthy replacement for Sagat very hard to believe. Also, his design. F.A.N.G is not very well designed, is he? His wardrobe choices and weird hat don't really help his cause at all. There's just nothing about F.A.N.G that screams menacing, and that isn't bad in itself. An unassuming villain is also a great idea, but F.A.N.G just doesn't back up his supposed skill with any personality or actual victories in the story. So I actually have a hard time accepting him as a villain, or even somebody who could give any of the protagonists a hard time at all. F.A.N.G could have been designed and written so much better, maybe with a bit more of a sadistic personality under a calm and relaxed demeanor. Necali. Next up is Necali, a character that was introduced in Street Fighter V. Necali's in an interesting situation. He was marketed as some big baddie and was forefront in the promotional material for Street Fighter V, but then once the game came out, we saw little to none of him. This is a little surprising as Necali's a pretty decent character. As a fighter, he's mid-tier to top tier. He's got a ground pound that works as well as anti-projectile. His normals are decent and his design is top-notch. He's got the hair, the feral behavior, and all the hallmarks of a wild character with no control. On top of that, his purpose is vague enough and ominous enough to make him seem genuinely intimidating. But then, all of this was undone by some pretty shoddy writing. He came into the story mode after a spectacular win against Ryu, promptly decides not to win another fight ever again. He suffered losses against Dalsim, Bison, and was absolutely washed when he had to run back with Ryu. Street Fighter might have a villain problem, but if Necali was better handled, they may have been able to solve it. But honestly, as it stands, I'd be flabbergasted if he makes Street Fighter 6 or is even ever seen again, all because nobody believed in him enough to write him a decent story. Oh, what a shame. Remy. Remy's a character that came into the Street Fighter cast in Street Fighter 3rd Strike. Remy was the cool 2000s emo kid. What was his problem? Well, it seemed pretty clear that the developers simply wanted a Chun Li clone in the game, seeing as the Air Force Major was not going to be in 3rd Strike. Remy's moveset was even similar to Chun Li and Nash's, but with a design that's more akin to Sephiroth from Final Fantasy. Now, the problem with Remy lies in the fact that while he had a decent design, his character motivation and fighting style left a lot to be desired. According to the lore, Remy has a bone to pick with all fighters because his dad was one and left them when they were kids, and while he was gone, his sister died. Tragic, sure. Enough to turn someone into a fighting master who hates all fighters and wants to bring them to ruin? Probably not so much. Remy is a well-designed character that could have done with better motivations and a better moveset. He hasn't appeared in any other Street Fighter game since, and it does kind of feel like a lost opportunity. Rufus. Our final entry is the man Rufus. Rufus was introduced in Street Fighter 4, but unlike Jury, who was also introduced in the same game and went on to become a household name and the president of Foot Nation, let's just say Rufus did not garner as many fans. His backstory was a little ridiculous, and his representation as a rival to Ken was laughable at best. With all this going against him, you have to wonder why they even bothered putting him in the game in the first place. But what makes Rufus such a missed opportunity are the early designs of the character. Then Rufus looked like this. Just look at that. Rufus's early design was sick, and if that version had made it into the game, maybe Rufus would have had the same reputation as Jury. While it was true that the Rufus that we got was made to be intentionally silly, it would seem that this was kinda unnecessary, and a character like early Rufus, who was to be called King Cobra by the way, would have been a much more welcome addition to the Street Fighter cast. It is hoped that Capcom revisits the idea of King Cobra and maybe brings him into Street Fighter 6 at some point. I know I'd definitely play him. And with that, we have come to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video, and sound off in the comments on which characters you think were hard done by Street Fighter. Until next time, take care and be good.